Hey! Hey there! Today I'm going to be showing you my unique Freyna build. Apologies in advance if I sound stuffy right now, I caught a cough and cold, so yeah. Freyna right now is a monster. She kills mobs as quickly as she kills my FPS, but almost everyone is using the typical Descendant mods. No one uses this module. But before we tackle about this module, we'll first talk about my other builds. I will be showing you 5 builds for this video, and the first one will be our speed running mopping build. Now the concept of this build is so we can just use our third skill and rush to the next segment. The mobs who touches the farts we leave behind will just die as we have a good amount of skill damage and range. In the 400% infiltrations, you can easily spam your first skill to kill the spawning mobs while leaving behind farts with your third skill. You don't have to spam your third skill as the duration is 16 seconds and the cooldown is at 7 seconds to save some mana. The main changes I did was instead of using the focus modules, I am happy with losing 12% total cooldown reduction for an additional skill damage. Why? 3.5 cooldown on our first skill is already good enough to be able to clear rooms easily. You'll also see that I have multi-talented here. This is because tech buff gives us more skill power and skill range, buffing our skills even more. One cast of your first skill will clear the entire room due to the additional range and enough additional damage. This also gives additional range to my third skill so I can ensure that the mobs that I run past through gets infected and dies. This makes me so I can just focus on getting into the next room rather than casting my first skill in between the rooms. But the multi-talented slot is very versatile. If you prefer to use Decimator, go ahead. If you're having trouble surviving, go with a secondary HP module or Spear and Shield module. Venom Synthesis itself is just a chill module to have. You can achieve the same speed you're getting with Venom Synthesis by spam rolling, but my pinky now often hurts because I'm spam rolling on Hailey and Gley now. You can definitely play around with the build by using Contagion. But Contagion does decrease your range and damage because Contagion removes all these extra dot damage. All these debuffs stack on top of each other dealing damage simultaneously. So removing these and replacing it with only one debuff damage would lose all the extra 100% dot damage and range. But hey, if you want to go with Contagion, no one's stopping you. Diving more into why I'm not using Focus on Tech and Focus on Toxic is because I would rather have more skill damage than cooldown as we already have a good amount of cooldown for our skills. When we use our fourth skill, we can easily burst both bosses and you'll have enough cooldown time for your fourth, in between when you're popping their immune mechanics. By the time you finish with the immunity mechanics, you can use your fourth skill again and do the exact same thing. Again, if you're having trouble surviving in the boss room, switch out multi-talented with another HP module or Spear and Shield. Why am I not using Toxic Specialist? That's because we already have more than 100% on our Toxic skill multiplier, and that's where the diminishing returns kick in. When we use Toxic Master, we distribute the modifiers so that each would still be below 100%, and you'll see the damage difference and relevance in this clip. For the reactor, go with Tech Secret Garden with skill cooldown or damage bonus on both rolls. It really doesn't matter. For the component, definitely go with the Slayer module. With your weapon, Secret Garden is fine because you are constantly spamming your tech skills, but it doesn't matter when you use your fourth skill as it counts as a weapon switch and you'll lose your Secret Garden buff nevertheless. I'm using the Zester's Devotion with these modules. Just make sure your weapon has magazine count and magazine count rolls. Now, you might wonder why do I have recoil and accuracy mods as well? Believe it or not, it affects your fourth skill too, as you can see here. Not needed, but I like to have it.
Time to wrap this up.
Make sure to slot in Sharp Precision Shot module for the increased fire rate, allowing you to use all bullets before the duration runs out. Next, we go to our boss farming build, and similar to Hailey's build, we don't care about cooldown, MP, survivability, because we either kill it in a few seconds or fail.
so stack up on damage as much as you can. Main change is that again, I am not using any focus skill modules and I am using maximize skill module for that additional skill power. The damage difference between the change in maximize skill versus toxic specialist is demonstrated in this clip. The difference with Hailey's build is that we are using critless here, so we have 2 free slots. There are no other modules that can boost our damage, so until that happens, we have 2 free slots for you to use. You can go duration for your 4th skill, just make it a bit safe and allow you to use all bullets. But again, these slots are free. For the weapon, go with impact weapon with the plus rounds on modules and rolls, as well as the sharp precision shot module for the fire rate. Next, we go to the shield build for Death Stalker. There really isn't anything special about the build except for the fact that we are stacking more on HP. I'm using a bit skill cost reduction here so that we won't run out of mana keeping our 2nd skill active. The reason why we are stacking HP is because our shield scales really well on HP. The concept of this build is to not care anything about Death Stalker except for this cause, because 2 stacks of Toxic Necrosis will reduce your damage. The more stacks, the more damage reduced. We talked about it in my previous video, so do check it out to learn more about it. You aren't really getting any more weapon damage from your Descendant modules, so the only way you can bump your damage is tank everything and keep shooting. No stopping, just keep shooting. This is achievable with this build. The reason why we are going with Venom Injection is because we are also using the new Distorted Resolve component, which restores our shield by 3.2% per stack of debuff with a 5% chance. Venom Injection makes it so that when we shoot anything with our weapon, a stack of Toxic Resist reduction will be applied and that will proc the shield recovery. Though, the Toxic Resist reduction debuff doesn't benefit us as we won't be using any skills for damage. With this build, we get this amazing EHP. 40,000 EHP is 10,000 more EHP than the comfortable amount. And with 26,900 shield, we are recovering 860 shield when we proc the new component, and we can further benefit from this when we just keep shooting. For the component rolls, go with HP, Def, Toxic Resist, MP recoveries, and shield recovery, not max shield. For the weapon, go with any Enduring Legacy build you're comfortable with. I personally am running this build and I have a trick that would mitigate the reload timer hit from the concentration priority module, and that was discussed in my Enzo build video. The only problem with this is that you will sometimes run out of ammo. So I run with a secondary weapon that will give me 800 bullets in reserve, and that is also discussed in my Enzo build video. Now for the crazy builds, we go back to our mobbing build, everything is the same. But this time, yes, we will replace Venom Synthesis with Toxic Simulation and Multi-Talented with the Passionate Sponsor. As mentioned before, we can achieve the speed we gain from Venom Synthesis by spam rolling. And the main reason why we use this mod is for that juicy 75% on our skill damage and weapon damage when we get 10 stacks. Obviously, we cannot use this when we are playing solo, but in groups, you can stack this to 10 in the boss room and watch as the bosses melt by your skills and by your weapons. When your 4th skill is in cooldown, you have no problem dealing damage as your weapon also deals huge damage to the bosses. Aside from the huge addition to your damage, a lot of people come to the 400% to level up, and they die quickly as they have lower level. You are also giving your allies an additional 30% boost on their defense while also dealing damage when an enemy targets them. You can also easily stack your Passionate Sponsor as you already have range mods. We are just taking advantage of what we already have. Now the next build is not viable at all for that stalker because we would have to sacrifice a lot of survivability and it's just not worth it. But this can be used in any other bosses and further amplifies our damage. We will still be using Toxic Stimulation and Passionate Sponsor again. On top of that, we will further boost our weapon damage by using the Venom Essence component. This component set will give us bonus 6.2% toxic power for ad control, attribute rate increase by 12% which will be useful later, 20% weapon attack damage, and 7% skill power modifier at 10 stacks. You can stack the component buff when you first cast your 1st or 3rd to the enemy and shoot it. You can also stack the buff if you use Toxic Bullet attribute, and that'll proc even more often because of the additional 12% attribute rate increase from the component. The choice is yours if you want to use the Toxic Bullet module. When you're in pre-battle phase, you can stack your Passionate Sponsor to 10 before the battle starts, and by then, you already have the bonus 75% weapon attack damage and skill damage. The only limitation with this is that you need at least one ally within the buff radius, so you'll constantly be able to replenish the stack's duration. I preferably stick to Eugen, Enzo, and Ajax for their supporting capabilities. You can see here the damage difference without and with the buffs. For the weapon, you can use what you like to use, but I personally will always prefer the Enduring Legacy for its high damage potential. The only thing you need to remember is to not use the Sharp Precision Shot module, as you need to keep casting your second skill to replenish the duration, and you'll lose the module buff as soon as you let go of your left click. For our survivability, we don't need to add any more defense, as the stat rolls on the components are mostly defense. Scale on HP. You can replace Sensory Depth with Resistance, but never replace it with the defense, as the diminishing returns will not give you the value for the slot. You already have too much defense, plus will have 100% uptime for your second skill, and that boosts 30% of your defense, as you can see here. 16,000 defense is already giving you 42% damage reduction, and you will need to add an additional 13,000 defense to reach 50% damage reduction. That isn't worth it. So either increase survivability with damage reduction or resistance. Why shouldn't I just use the Venom Injection Shield build? Although it's fun seeing you tank and just recover the shield in fights, you really don't have any damage boost aside from shot focus. Using Venom Essence component will reduce your shield drastically and will almost always die from one attack from the boss. Because of the low amount of shield, your shield recovery won't matter as well. So with these, you don't really have any way to increase your damage. Why am I not using Toxic Mixture? Although 90% weapon attack and crit chance bonus sounds good, there are a lot of factors that gets in between you and that damage. First is that stacking Necrosis to 100 in a short amount of time is only achievable by using your 4th skill. That would get you to about 94 with a weapon with bonus magazine count and with Sharp Precision Shot module. Now, even from the start, you already are losing value on DPS, as your 4th skill deals significant lower damage for weapon-focused bosses, and especially with a Gunner build Descendant. That's about 10 to 20 seconds of losing damage. I would rather have these amounts of damage for 10 to 20 seconds than 27,000 damage. The real problem is after you've used your 4th skill. Remember that you have Sharp Precision Shot module in your weapon, but you still need to stack Necrosis by using 1st and 3rd skill after you've used your 4th skill. That means you lose the buff from your Sharp Precision. Necrosis stacks only lasts for 5 seconds, so imagine your Sharp Precision buff refreshing every 5 seconds. You'll lose so much DPS value from your weapon even though you're keeping 100 Necrosis stacks. Okay, so let's use Mental Focus module. That'll only get you up to 62 Necrosis stacks, and that's only 55% firearm bonus. Also, that's 10 seconds of lost DPS as well for the ramping time. That still isn't going to compete against a consistent 75% weapon damage boost from the start of the fight. Not to mention, you can't stack Necrosis during immunity phase. That's another loss of damage. Passionate Sponsor can always be up even in immunity phase, so you'll always have that consistent 75% weapon damage boost. Not to mention the defense boost to you and allies. And you're expending 45 mana per 10 seconds, constantly casting 1st and 3rd replenishing Necrosis duration instead of only 25 mana. Are all these really worth it for a 15% weapon damage and 11% crit chance difference? Taking into account that you still need to stack it to 100. Nah. I really do hope that we get a Fallen Hope and Divine Punishment buff, because I did have an idea in using the Divine Punishment for Meditation and Glory buff. But the weapon itself doesn't compete against the Enduring Legacy. That's it for the video, guys, and I hope that you give the builds a try. Don't forget about this week's reactor farming rotation, and I will be posting our 3rd video for the series where I showcase new farming spots for efficiency. For now, I'll see you in the next one. Bye! If you want a copy of my datasheet, click the tutorial video and the link is in the description. If you're wondering whether I have a Hailey build, yes, I do.